Welcome back to another edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. Andy Bull Barch joined alongside Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Chronicle, Telegram, and the Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownsZone.com. Scott, great to have you back again. And, boy, another interesting week has passed. The dress rehearsal, a thing of the past. One more preseason game to go before we get going with the regular season. And, well, this is a team certainly not short of storylines, and every week that we talk, it feels like something drastic has changed and there's another surprise. And, certainly this week, no surprise with Jalen Strong being released. What does that mean for that unit moving forward? And do you think that they released him with the idea that knowing how talented he is and how professional he is, they kind of did him a solid by going separate ways?
I do, yeah. I'll start with that end part. I think the only reason you cut him, I think there's two reasons you cut him on Monday night instead of Saturday after the preseason finale, is one, so you can see your young guys. You don't have to give him any reps Thursday night against the Lions. The second reason is to do the guy a favor. It gets him on the waiver wire before however many guys. It's 40 guys getting cut from every team, so 1,200 guys on the weekend. It gives him an advantage. He's the only guy on the waiver wire, or one of the only guys. And even if he clears the waiver wire, then teams get a chance to look at him. He can go try out before you get this glut of available talent. So I do think they were looking out for him in some degree. But it was a surprise. We watched him practice Monday. I watched him go through practice. He was taking reps. He had flashed during training camp. He had flashed in the preseason. He had a touchdown. He had 7 catches, which was second on the team. But I think he struggled against Tampa Bay. And not that everybody didn't, but he did. I think he wasn't always in the right spots. And when John Dorsey got together with the coaching staff and they look at the receiving candidates, I think they said, if we're going to go with a guy that's maybe struggling a little bit or hasn't been great, let's go with a younger guy. Let's go with a guy with more potential, maybe a Damian Ratley, maybe a Derek Willis. And, we've seen what Jalen Strong has done. He should be a finished product. He's been in the league for 4 years or whatever it is. So I think that was kind of the genesis behind it. He just wasn't wasn't better enough than this next rung of guys.
Let's talk about that next rung of guys as well, because, Braxton Miller is certainly a part of that equation now as well, and people wondering, how does he fit into the equation moving forward? He's been with the team for not quite a week now at the time of this recording for the podcast, but the rest of that room is pretty talented. There are some question marks.
Yep.
Which other dominoes do you think are going to fall in that room now that they've gotten rid of Jalen Strong? They've got to make some room. Are there some other guys here that you think could be fighting for their lives on Thursday?
Without a doubt. And the first question to me is, they have 3 automatics, right? Odell, Jarvis, and Rashard Higgins. Then do they keep 5 or 6? So then you're either looking at 2 spots or 3 spots. And I think Damian Ratley probably has a spot. He was a draft pick last year. The guys always like their draft picks. I think he flashed a little bit last year, but didn't play a lot. Missed most of camp with the hamstring injury, and they didn't play him against Tampa because they wanted to make sure he was okay. He's going to play Thursday night against the Lions. I'm not even sure he has to do a lot, and he's on the roster. And then you look at Derek Willis, who flashes great potential. He's tall. He gives you a dynamic that nobody else does on this receiving core, which could be the reason they keep him, but he disappears. I think there's big lulls where he drops balls. He's in the wrong spot. Just not consistent enough. And sometimes I wonder, does he really want to be out there? Like, just the way he runs routes, he doesn't give you that sense of urgency that I think coaches are looking for and GMs are looking for. So you got those 2 guys. And then, you got an Ishmael Hyman who probably doesn't make it. You got Dorian Baker who probably doesn't make it. A couple of young guys. And then you got the Damon Giuseppe and Braxton Miller. And I think Braxton Miller has the advantage there by a ton. Not only has he played in the league, he's really fast, still really quick. And I think he can return kicks. Hasn't done a lot, but I think he can. And I think he can play special teams. And I really look at Sheehy Giuseppe as a one-trick pony. He's a punt returner, and I'm not sure he's a good enough punt returner to use up one of your 53 spots.
Well, receiver's a position we've talked a lot about, and it's the one I think that has certainly got the most amount of allure to it because of the dynamic personalities in the room. And I think you can go to the opposite end of the spectrum when you take a look at that offensive line. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because you don't want your offensive linemen being divas, so to speak. But that's also a unit that's certainly under the microscope. But if you look at the game last week and that dress rehearsal, that's a unit that really didn't look all that great. How concerned should we be about that line?
I think concerned, without a doubt. To me, receiver and offensive line were the two weakest spots against Tampa Bay. Baker didn't throw great, but he got no help. He was pressured. He was moved off his spot. And then I didn't think the receivers made any contested catches. And you got to help your quarterback out. There's a throw down the left sideline to Willie's. He tries to make a one-arm throw. Baker puts it in that left arm, and he can't catch it. Higgins dives for a ball in the end zone, can't come up with it. We think differently about Baker's performance if those catches are made. So having said that, going back to your question, I am worried about the offensive line. You know, you're solid at center. You're solid at left guard. I'm okay with Chris Hubbard at right tackle. I think I like him better than other people do. I think he got better the second half of last season. But right guard, where Eric Kush is going to be your starter, and left tackle, where it's Greg Robinson, they didn't look good against Tampa. Noah Spence got past Greg Robinson, and Ndamukong Suh got past or pushed back Eric Kush. So, you know, I don't know what John Dorsey's going to do. I think there's a chance he tries to upgrade right guard through a trade. I think it's easier to do at right guard than left tackle. Obviously, it's hard to get a left tackle these days. And I was talking to Joel Bitonio on Monday about Robinson, and I said, are you still as confident? We saw what he did in the final 8 games last year. And he said he was good enough first then. He goes, he needs to cut back on some penalties. He had like 10 penalties in the final 8 games. But when Greg is focused, he's a really good player. And that's a theme that comes up. And I think that's why the number 2 pick in the draft has bounced around. He just, whether it's not the confidence, it's not the focus, whatever those intangibles are, and maybe that clicks in the regular season. You know, maybe he gets a regular season, you game plan, you can shift your line, you can shift your protection, you kind of help him a little bit. So I think they're going to ride with Greg Robinson. The question is, the right guard has to be good enough that you can help left tackle. You can't have the weakness at both spots because it's tough to cover up 2 spots. So I think it is a concern. I think Dorsey will explore options, but I expect it to be these 5 guys. And the fact is, they just have to play better come week 1.
You mentioned that you expect Dorsey to explore some options. Who do you think some of the attainable targets could be? Because, I mean, a lot of these guys aren't exactly household names, but are there some guys out there right now you think could be made available?
Yeah, that's tough. I've not scoured the list of, okay, who's a competent backup. Obviously John Dorsey knows that better than I, and he spent all week looking at these type of guys, whether or not they hit the waiver wire or whether or not a team calls and says, hey, we're probably going to cut this guy. Can we get something back? And maybe that's where you see a 6th-round pick go for, a right guard, whether it's a young guy that's not going to make the team or an older guy that a team decides, we're going to go younger. And Dorsey says, hey, that's fine. Give me the experience, and I'll plug him in at right guard. Now, when you add a guy like this, and I always find this fascinating, you've practiced with this guy for months, right? He's been your right, and it doesn't matter if it's right guard or tight end or whatever. You practice with this guy for months. He knows your playbook in and out, and yet you're that convinced that a guy somewhere else is going to come in and be better without knowing the playbook, without knowing the right tackle and center, their chemistry, their relationship. So, I think sometimes people think the grass is always greener, and they go out and get a guy, and he's not any better than what you have. Having said that, you also spend 4 months going, man, this guy can't do this, and he can't do this. So you see a guy's weaknesses, and maybe you look at those too much as opposed to what he can do. But having said all that, it wouldn't be a stunner to see John Dorsey try to shore up one of those 2 spots, and right guard would be the spot where you could probably get a guy for way cheaper than left tackle.
Where does this leave Austin Corbett? Because I know a lot of people are tremendously disappointed for all the obvious reasons. I mean, you don't draft a guy that high in the 2nd round to be a backup offensive lineman, and it seems like right now he may fit better as a backup center. Now, given Tretter's injury history, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but you expect a lot more out of a guy that you picked that high. Where does all of this leave him?
That's a good question. It's at best on the bench, at worst on the waiver wire, right? And maybe you swap 2 guys who haven't reached their potential, 2 underachievers, let's say. Maybe that's a trade that John Dorsey can make and ship Austin Corbett for somebody else's, trash, so to speak. I don't think he does that. I think you don't give up on a 33. It's hard to give up on a 33rd pick a year plus in. It just is. And it would look bad. And I don't know if John Dorsey's willing to admit that mistake. I don't think he will. I think Corbett sticks around and is your swing interior guy. But, if people have asked me, who's a surprise cut? He would be that guy. Like, he would be the biggest name if he got cut. And I wouldn't eliminate it. I don't think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't eliminate it. And then it's up to Austin to take advantage of whatever chance he gets. If there's an injury, if Cush stinks for the first 3 weeks and you go, hey, we got to go somewhere else, you would like to think that Corbett's that guy that steps in. The problem is he just hasn't shown anything. He played 14 snaps on offense. He's been bad enough in the preseason where they couldn't keep him at right guard. You just wonder if something happened to Treader or Cush, will the coaches even feel confident enough putting him out there? And if they don't, then you got to get rid of the guy. If they do, then the best case scenario for him is he gets that chance and finally runs with it.
Do you sense that a whole lot has changed with him through the course of the offseason? I mean, is his quickness not where it used to be? Is his strength maybe not nearly as great as they hoped that it was going to be? I mean, has he not projected? What kinds of elements have come into play here where he's not been able to be better than guys that everybody expected him to be way better than?
Exactly. I mean, look at Coach, who's going to be the starter. I think he started 12 games he was a 2013 draft pick, right? So whatever, that's 5 or 6 years. He's been a journeyman, bounced around teams. So you're right. So something's wrong with Austin Corbett. And I think it's a combination of things. One, I don't know how much value you give to it, but it is going from left tackle to right guard's an adjustment, left side to right side, out in space to the interior. That's one thing. I think he's dealt with a confidence issue, and he won't admit it. I talked to him, and he said, I'm still as confident as ever, maybe more confident. But he said it, and I talked to Joe Batonio, and they both said, the best piece of advice is don't get down on yourself. You can play at this level. So if he's kind of has to tell himself that over and over, I'm not sure everybody does. I think some guys just have that inner confidence. And then I don't think he's as strong as he needs to be. And I'm not an offensive line expert by any stretch. But there's too many plays that I notice where he's getting pushed back. And John Dorsey, when they drafted him, said, we love this guy's nasty streak. He finishes plays. He plays through the whistle. I just haven't seen that. And maybe it's because he hasn't played in games. And you can't take a guy to the ground in training camp in Berea. But it just feels like that hasn't translated. The Bulldog from Nevada hasn't shown up enough. And if that's one of his strengths and you're not seeing that strength, then all of a sudden you see all those weaknesses instead.
Player-for-player swaps don't happen very often when you're talking about trades in the NFL. Usually there's a draft pick involved. It's very rare that you see multiple bodies involved in a deal, especially this time of the year. But we've talked extensively about just how crowded that wide receiver room is and how talented it is. Is there a chance maybe John Dorsey looks at that room and says, you know what, if there's a guard out there or if there's an offensive lineman out there that he feels might be attainable, could you see a potential player-for-player swap?
I could. You know what? I would have thought it more before DJ Montgomery went on IR with the hamstring, more before they cut Jalen Strong, because I thought they had more pieces and liked the guys better at receiver. But having said that, if somebody's in love with Derek Willis and you're going to go Ratley Miller, then you can probably trade Derek Willis for something. I think they have some depth at corner, and they could make that kind of trade, or even safety in the secondary in general. And then D-line. They have some D-line excess. There's going to be guys that can play in this league, especially D-tackle. I'm thinking about Carl Davis, even Brian Price, Daniel Ukali, Trevin Coley. Not all those guys are going to make the team. Probably one of those guys makes the team, and I think they can all play at this level. And that's a valuable position. So if you can trade one of those guys for an excess somewhere else, I think that's the kind of trade John Dorsey would look for. And you said it doesn't happen a lot, and you're right. But we've seen John Dorsey. He's only been here, 19 months, 20 months. That's the kind of thing I wouldn't put past him. He's able to make trades. He's able to do unconventional deals. And that wouldn't shock me at all if that came down Friday or Saturday.
Again, we've got you locked into the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast with Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Chronicle, Telegram, and the Medina Gazette. Shifting gears now and taking a look at the final preseason game.
Yep.
Clearly one that doesn't get looked at a lot because you don't see a lot of the marquee players playing in it, but this is also make or break time for a lot of guys who are on the proverbial bubble. Which guys should we be watching closely for on Thursday when these guys play in that preseason finale who are on that bubble?
Right. Well, we covered the receivers, so they're obviously going to be – that's where my eyes are going to go first. After that, how about tight end? You got David Njoku and Demetrius Harris, and then you got a bunch of huge question marks. And I wrote a story Tuesday – I don't even know what day it is anymore – Tuesday afternoon about Seth DeValve. Right, he's a fourth-round pick out of Princeton in 2016. He's been up and down. Missed 3 weeks with the concussion. Now he's playing tight end. He's playing some fullback. Do they keep him? I think he has potential, but it just hasn't shown up enough. It was a previous regime's draft pick. So I think he's squarely on the bubble, would have to do something to stay. Maybe he's the kind of guy that stays for a week until Rico Gathers gets off suspension. Maybe you keep him for a week and then somebody else pops up and you swap him out, or you even keep him Saturday and you get rid of him Sunday, that kind of thing. So he's a guy that's on the bubble as well as the rest of the tight ends. Pharaoh Brown, Steven Carlson, Rico Gathers, I think, is on the bubble. So I got tight end, we got receiver. Backup offensive line is tough. Are they going to keep 3 or 4? It's just a bunch of big bodies. We already talked about Corbett. And then that D tackle spot, to me, Devereaux Lawrence, who we talked about last week, was one of my surprise players. And then I wrote about him this week. First of all, he's hysterical, too. I mean, the story I wrote, I thought was full of just hysterical quotes. And I think he's locked up a spot. So you got Richardson, Ogunjobi, and then Devereaux Lawrence. And let's say they only keep 4. Then it's between Trevin Coley, who started a bunch of games in the last 2 years, Carl Price, who played with the Ravens, or Carl Davis, who played with the Ravens, Brian Price, Daniel Qualley, who's looked good. I keep butchering his name, but he's looked good in training camp. So I think you got to watch out for those guys. And if Lawrence doesn't play, then you know he's on the team, right? I mean, that's either know he's on the team or getting cut, and we would know he's on the team. And then maybe a couple of secondary spots. Phillip Gaines is the backup nickel. And I think he's probably got a spot because they don't really have a good backup nickel. They tried Eric Murray there, and he struggled. He's more a safety. And then do they keep 4 or 5 safeties? Sheldrick Redwine, 4th-round pick, rookie out of Miami. I don't think he's played well in the preseason. Every time I notice him, it's like, he's getting beat. He's missing a tackle, getting a penalty. I don't think you cut a 4th-round pick, but do you keep him as a fifth safety just to keep him and hope he's good on special teams? Like, those are the kind of questions that could be answered Thursday night against the Lions.
I want to focus on a group right now that I know we've touched on just a little bit, and that's the linebackers, because at the beginning of camp, you heard a lot about how some of this youth infusion could certainly challenge the Schoberts and the Kirksies of the world, and the names that pop up are Taki and Mack Wilson, of course, and you and I talked off air about how Mack Wilson certainly got a lot of attention for the interceptions and things of that nature. Taki, of course, has been injured. How much do you think those guys are going to cut into the playing time of Kirksey and Schobert?
I'll tell you this. My opinion on this has changed at least twice during training camp. At the start of camp, I would have said, no, I think it's Kirksey and Schobert. A couple of weeks into training camp, I'd have said, hey, now I can envision scenarios where Mack Wilson takes time away from Kirksey, where Sione Taki threatens Joe Schobert. Maybe even one of those guys could be a surprise cut, a surprise trade. Now, at the end of training camp, I'm convinced Schobert and Kirksey are going to play 100% of the snaps, at least to start the season. And I say that for 2 different reasons. Taki pulled a hamstring and hasn't been on the field in 2 weeks. So it might be even more than 2 weeks. So it's hard to gain any ground, right? And Joe Schobert, who is his chief competition at middle linebacker, has had a really strong camp and a really strong preseason. He's in a contract year. He's going to be a test case for John Dorsey because I think he's going to play well. He could play at a Pro Bowl level. But then do you re-sign him? Do you let him get away because you can only pay so many guys? And do you spend money on Joe Schobert when you drafted a guy in the 3rd round to take his spot? And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's kind of the dynamics involved with Joe Schobert and Taki. And I talked to Schobert about that the other day. He's got all this uncertainty, and all he's worried about is he's trying to focus on just getting back to that Pro Bowl. Then Mack Wilson, you said it. He had 1 week where he might have been, I'm not going to say the best player on the field because Garrett's out there and Baker and Odell, but he was really good. And he made interception after interception. He had 2 against Washington in the preseason game. And then I haven't noticed him a lot. And when I've noticed him, it's screwing up. Missing tackles against Indy. Penalties. He had a chance to make a sack. Doesn't make it. He blew a coverage Friday night against Tampa. So I think just, not that these guys don't have good potential, and not that they won't be your starting linebackers in 2020. I think for 2019, with the expectations around this team, Kirksey and Schobert are just sure things, and I just haven't seen enough from the rookies to change my mind. Now, maybe maybe Kirksey or Schobert rolls an ankle, the rookie plays and never gives a spot back. I could see that. I could see week 8, Taki's got him, has some reps under him, has played special teams, and then you try to transition him in. But for right now, I think it's the veterans.
Going to be fascinating to see how that develops because, those are 2 guys I think everybody was really excited to see at the beginning of camp. And as you mentioned, sometimes you just have to let these things play out. Look, sometimes the veterans, Their mettle is certainly tested.
Right.
They pass that test with flying colors. They hold off the rookies, and sometimes the rookies end up passing them. So I'll be fascinated to see how that plays out. And, I've got to ask you about this, too. The whole Andrew Luck thing has certainly caught fire over the last couple of days, and it doesn't seem like there's any gray area here. Either people are really angry that he retired and can't understand why you would retire in your late 20s. Other people totally understand that as beat up as he's been, you admire the fact that he can step away from a game he's poured his heart and soul into. So just wanted to get your thoughts on Andrew Luck stepping away.
Sure. I mean, obviously the story of the NFL, right, the last 4 or 5 days. First of all, I'm not an Andrew Luck expert. I don't know him, so I hate to speak too much or make too many assumptions. But I will say this: I can't begrudge any person for walking away from something, especially when we know the toll he's been under, the physical toll he's taken. He spent years trying to come back from that shoulder. Now here it's an ankle or a calf or whatever it is that they can't figure out. And, we're talking about my golf shot of the week. I mean, I've had a bad back for a week, and I've been miserable, right? I've been in pain. My wife said, I can tell your back's hurting because you're being, I don't know what word she used, jerk or something, whatever it was, grumpy. You're more grouchy than normal. Well, if you're in constant pain, I don't care if you're making $25 million. I don't care that you're famous. That affects your daily life. So, I think it just became too much for him, and he said, you know what? I'm going to shut it down. And part of me thinks the other part of that is he doesn't love football like some guys love football. Like Tom Brady's playing when he's 41, 42, however old Tom Brady is. And I could just see Tom Brady at 29 saying, there's no way I'm not going to keep playing football. But Andrew Luck, not only do he have the injuries, he's got other interests, which doesn't mean he doesn't love football, but he always felt like a guy that wanted to play football, but if he couldn't, he'd be okay. And I think that's where it came to. He got to the point where it's just not worth it for me to put up with the physical hell that I'm going through day in and day out, especially when he doesn't necessarily see a payoff. You tear an ACL, in 9 or 12 months, you're going to be back. But if they can't figure out what's wrong with your leg and it's killing you, and you know what the shoulder's been like, and he absorbed hit after hit when the Colts couldn't figure out how to block him, couldn't figure out how to draft an offensive lineman or wouldn't draft an offensive lineman, I can't begrudge a guy for saying, hey, I'm 29. I hope when I'm 33, I can walk around feeling like a normal guy.
You feel like this is something that could happen again and again because it's not like it's something that's totally rare. It's a little odd that a guy with that kind of profile would step away in his late 20s. But, we've seen linebackers in their mid-20s step away and say, you know what, maybe it's not worth it. Like you said, there are some guys that just don't love it like the others do, and their lives don't necessarily depend on it like others do. I mean, they just don't need to feed that fix, for lack of a better term. And for a guy like Andrew Luck, I mean, sure, he made a heck of a lot of money playing football, but just because he made a lot of money doing it doesn't mean he has to do it because this is a guy that's pretty well educated, and he didn't necessarily need it.
Exactly. He came from a good family, and they had money. His dad played in the league, and he's a Clevelander, went to Ignatius. And Andrew went to Stanford, and he's made a ton of money. It's unusual because it's a quarterback, and it's unusual because quarterbacks play a long time these days. Big Ben, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers. So that's why it's unusual. And you think that these guys don't take the punishment that a linebacker does, right? The concussion issues, that's not why Andrew Luck's retiring. But I do think with the amount of money in the game today, you could see more guys walk away earlier. And I don't know this. I'm just conjecturing because that's what we do. Myles Garrett strikes me as that kind of guy, right? He's got diverse interests. He's a great player, number one pick in the draft like Luck was. It wouldn't stun me if Myles plays for 7 years and then says, I'm done. And that's a healthy career. It might be enough to be a Hall of Fame career. He just feels like one of those guys. And I've never talked to Myles about that. Maybe we did, and he said, I want to play 10 years or whatever. But I think there's certain guys you can envision that way. And I talked to Demarius Randall today, and he said, I want to play another 12 years, and he'll be 37 or 38. So I think it's just different mindsets, different interests. Are you a sports junkie? Are you a football junkie? And you can't begrudge anybody either way. I mean, I can't tell you what to do. So I understand why Colts fans would be frustrated because they went from Super Bowl contender to probably number 4 in the AFC South. But the guy devoted his being to that franchise, and the only reason they were any good at all over the last 5-6 years was because of Andrew Luck.
Well, that's a pretty good segue to our final question here. You mentioned that you had a conversation with Demarius Randall. I know that's a story that will be coming out here in the next few days, and you told me off here. That was a pretty colorful conversation you had with Randall.
I'll tell you what, he is great. Yeah, I think it's going to be a Q&A in our season preview section for the Browns, which will come out next week sometime. And I'll obviously post it at BrownsZone. But I sat down with him. I think it was a full half an hour we were talking today after practice. And there's a million different points we could talk about. But the guy's a great talker. He's got all the confidence in the world. And one of the things that stuck out about this conversation, there were multiple, but one of them was we were talking about how good the team was and how he couldn't believe the roster, the shape of the roster on offense and defense. And I said, well, the NFL is built for there to be a bunch of close games. Every game's supposed to be close. He goes, I know. But he goes, I don't think we're going to play all close games. This is paraphrasing, and I haven't transcribed it yet. But I think he said he could see 8 games where they just blow teams out, which is stunning in NFL terms. So if that actually happens, but that's how he thinks. He thinks this roster is that good that it's head and shoulders above a lot of teams in this league. And the fact that the Browns were 0-16 2 years ago, to even where a guy could say that with a straight face, is remarkable, And then he talked about the other thing that I'll mention from the conversation was we were talking about trades and Odell and how we couldn't believe the Browns got Odell and how could you trade this generational type player. So then I said, well, what were your feelings when you got traded? And he thought I was still talking about Odell. So he goes, well, I heard safety. He goes, I thought I might have been traded. He goes, I called Dorsey to find out if I had been traded to the Giants. So I go, what are you talking about? I go, I'm talking about you. He goes, oh, no. He goes, I meant when Odell. And all he heard was safety to the Giants, and obviously wound up being Jabril Peppers. But he said, we only had 2 safeties. I knew it was one of us. So he was worried that he was going to be traded away from a team that he thinks is a legitimate Super Bowl team. He was worried that he was headed to New York, but then he got a hold of Dorsey, or however he wound up finding out that he was staying put. And, obviously he's grateful, loves Cleveland, wants to stick around. He's another contract year guy. He wants to be here. He thinks the Browns want to have him. Obviously they have to figure out money eventually. But yeah, I think people enjoy the Q&A because he is just on everything. I mean, we talked about a bunch of different topics, and I thought he was great on all of them.
That's hilarious. He thought he might be the guy going to the Giants. He wouldn't be able to enjoy Odell Beckham Jr. That's great stuff. Well, that and, of course, the fact that he thinks they're going to blow teams out, too. That could be pretty interesting. Well, there's no golf shot of the week this week. You were nursing a sore back last week, so no golf for you last week, right?
Yeah, that's a sore subject. I could have played a couple of days. My schedule was worked out. I was trying to line it up, and my back just hurt so much I couldn't play. So I think it's better. Knock on wood, I'm over the hump, and maybe I'll be able to get out this week. But I did get to watch Rory McIlroy win $15 million, so we'll use that as my golf shot of the week.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that at all. Well, hopefully you can get back out on the course next week and enjoy some time out on the links before the regular season kicks into high gear. Scott, a pleasure as always. We'll do it again next week.
Sounds good, and we'll have a regular season to talk about. How about that? It's about time.
Yeah, well, sometimes training camp feels like it drags, doesn't it?
A little bit.
Yeah. Getting to the end of the exhibition season here. The next time we come your way, it'll be the end of exhibition season. And as Scott mentioned, we will be on the brink of a brand new season. That'll wrap things up on today's edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch all of you again next week. Again next week.